Welcome to the Iconic Scholar Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Kessler, co-founder of Scholarnetics 360. Get ready to journey beyond textbooks and learn from healthcare's brightest minds. Each episode is packed with insights and wisdom from industry leaders, uncovering the lessons and experiences that shape their careers. Join us to unlock the secrets to your successful career and discover the innovations shaping healthcare's future. Remember, while we're here to educate and inspire, we are not offering medical advice, just fun, educational, and authentic conversations. Okay, let's begin. Welcome to the Iconic Scholar. I'm your host, Andrea Kessler, and I have my amazing co-host, Eder Garavito. Hi, Eder. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Andrea. How are you today?
I'm grateful to be here because we have an amazing guest.
We do.
David Lorello. He's enjoyed a long and interesting professional career with training and acting and improvisation, along with physical therapy. Love those two directions, and I'm eager to hear more about them. David has spent his time bridging these two seemingly different careers. They are probably more similar than you think, and that's what I'm hoping to learn from Dave. Dave, you also can share with us a little bit about your current role in PT education. I'm excited to hear about everything you've done because you bring so much to physical therapy. But let's start with where you are right now.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yeah, so currently right now, I guess my primary occupation is associate professor for the program in physical therapy for Franklin Pierce University. So Franklin Pierce is the university is based in New Hampshire, but we have a satellite physical therapy program here in Goodyear. I'm out of Arizona, so in Goodyear, Arizona. And we actually was a kind of an in-place standard program, and then we transitioned over the last couple of years since the pandemic. We transitioned to a hybrid program. So now we're a hybrid program. But my clinical practice is I've been in burn rehab for almost 19 years now. So I've spent my entire clinical practice at the Arizona Burn Center, which is inside of Valleywise Medical Center, which is a large level 1 trauma center in Phoenix.
And Dave and we connected a few years ago and learned that I worked with an OT who Phoenix took from Pittsburgh. Amazing OT. I don't want to say her name because I didn't ask her permission, but she was amazing. We were talking and I said, wait, Phoenix Burn Center. I know somebody who moved from Pittsburgh to Arizona, and it turned out it was her.
Man, sometimes like this world is so small.
It is.
And I barely missed David. So he came to teach at my school at Midwestern University when I was going on clinical rotations. He shows up all jazzed up with his bow tie. I'm like, I want to learn from this guy. And we were on our way out the door. So I never really got to learn from him, but I've had the pleasure to work with him as he's on some working with us at the College of St. Mary, and amazing individual and great educator as well. But man, I wish I could go back in time and learn some of the good stuff that he has to share with the students as well.
Yeah, definitely interesting, very long, interesting career. I recently actually been working with a coach and kind of gave her like you pretty much probably as much as I've said so far. After I think the first couple of sessions, she said, I just want to know, I let you know I did some internet sleuthing on you. I was like, oh, okay. She's like, you have done a lot of stuff in your life, and you don't you don't give yourself enough credit for all of the things that you have been involved in. She's like, I was kind of blown away. She's like, at first I kind of thought I might have had the wrong guy, but I was like, oh, well, thanks.
And that's exactly why you're here, because you are amazing.
You are, and the whole coach thing. We're working with a coach right now, Dave, and the same thing happened to me. Mind you, you're for much further than I am in your career, but it might just be a PT thing where we're humble, or a healthcare thing, because the same thing happened to me where I sent her my CV, and she'll love listening to this when I say it anyways. And to me, it was just like, oh, here's my CV that I put together. And she went through it and she's like, oh my goodness, look at all the things you've accomplished. So I'm glad that you also have had somebody to make you feel big, because probably when you look back at all your accomplishments and you kind of were like fly on the wall, you've made a huge impact, much more than I have in my early career still, but it was also very revealing for me as well. So I think we need to celebrate that.
Yeah, I really should reflect a little bit more on all I've done. So
Well, we want to hear about that. So start from the beginning and don't leave out any details.
I mean, like in terms of like, so I have an undergraduate degree. I have a Bachelor of Arts in theater, and right after graduation, moved to New York City, as you know, many actors do, and spent a little over 5 years, close to 6 years, just kind of really not doing much of anything. Like I think my introduction to my when I went to started PT school was that I was a former actor from New York where I appeared in lots of crap. Like I did not, like I look at my theater resume and it's just like, it's just terrible thing after terrible thing. And I got hired by a theater company. I worked for a theater company. I toured with them for a while in the late 90s. And then they wanted to bring me on and hire me full time. And I was like, oh my gosh, like a full time theater job. But I had to move to Minneapolis. So I moved from New York to Minneapolis, quickly found out that the production end was not really what I thought it was going to be. Like creativity it's a business, all right? So we had to make business decisions, and at least for my position, it wasn't really about creativity anymore. So I was like, all right, I really don't like this, but I'll give it 2 years because I promised myself I would give it 2 years no matter what. So I did, but it was also low paying. I was still waiting tables on the side, but I had health insurance, which was wonderful. And so after like my 2 years, I was kind of approaching my second year, and I'm like, all right, well, what's my next step? And I was like, all right, I really like having this health insurance thing. The thought of just like losing all of that just to like wait tables full time and just do the theater thing, that didn't really appeal to me. And so I was like, well, maybe I could find a career where Minneapolis is an amazing city for arts, and so I was like, well, maybe I could find, do something where I have like a regular job, and then I could do theater, in the evenings and still be involved somehow, and maybe do commercials on the side. I don't know. So at first, I thought, oh well, I'm an actor. I've been training my voice for so many years. Speech therapy. That sounds like that would be something that I would be interested in. So I started researching it, and it kind of sounded cool at first, but then I started kind of doing a deep dive, and there was all this stuff about like swallowing and food and pocketing. And I was just like, ew, I'm like, all right, that is okay. I can't handle that. So, but while I was looking up speech, like OT and PT kept coming up throughout. And I happened to be going to this massage therapist who worked out of a physical therapy clinic. And so I asked my massage therapist, I asked him about it, and he's like, well, let me take you out after our session is let me take you out to the PT. And so I started talking to her about it, and all she talked about was how much she loved her career. And to be honest, I had never heard anybody in their life talk about a career that they loved. Like everybody that I knew was just doing whatever they were doing, which was the stepping stone to whatever was going to be next, right? So I was really kind of shocked to hear that. So I was like, oh, well, maybe this would and it kind of like it started kind of like checking boxes, like, okay, like won't be stuck behind a desk. Little did I know about all of the massive amounts of documentation that we have to do. But like maybe like I could stay physically active and all of these things. And so I went to the University of Minnesota. I asked them, I said, is this feasible? And I think they were also very intrigued by my story. I happen to have a lot of science when I was an undergrad, so they were like, "Oh, you have a lot of science." Even though I was a theater major, I took a lot of science on the side because I enjoyed it. And so they were like, "Yeah, let's see if we could do this." And so I still had some prereqs, so I took the prereqs, and then they it was funny, like I got this email, and unbeknownst to me, the person, the admissions director who had sent it, I guess she had forgotten that there was also like several other emails below it. So when she had forwarded me this thing, I don't think she realized that she had forwarded me all this stuff, but there was like this long conversation, like email chain among various faculty at the school about like, this is the theater guy that I'm telling you about. So I was like, all right, like I haven't like been officially accepted yet, but at least I felt pretty good at that point. So I was like, all right, I'm the theater guy. So that was pretty cool. So I mean, so they accepted me, and then I went to PT school, and then I think probably like a lot of PTs, I kind of thought like, oh yeah, I'll be this. I'll move back to New York maybe, or I'll stay here and I'll work for some sports team, and I'll be this like sports PT guy. And then I was doing some shadowing in a nursing home, and on my very first day, they took me on wound rounds. So you want to go? We're going to take you on wound rounds. I'm like, all right, I don't know what that is. Where I saw like the wildest, craziest wounds. I had never seen anything other than like a cut or a scrape. So I was, like very horrified. But at the end of the day, I was like incredibly intrigued. And so then I walked into PT school on the first day, and I'm like, I want to do wound care. And so then I was like the actor that wanted to do wound care throughout PT school. So, and I was the only one that was like had any interest in either of those things. So
And I think you're still the only one, by the
I
way.
really am. And so that was kind of it. And then I went on, PT school was wonderful. And we can get into details. I think certainly my acting skills certainly came into play throughout PT school because, as PT educators, like we make students do a lot of presentations and a lot of group activities. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, these are so boring. I'm like, so I'm going to make every presentation I give like it's going to be a production. Like it's going to be like, and so every presentation I gave, there was something. There was funny slides, there were jokes, there was music. My research group, we made a movie. Like we actually wrote a script and made a movie. Like so, like throughout PT school, my goal was to like at least like learn as much as I could, right? Because I was changing my career, but also be as entertained as possible and enjoy the experience. So I did a lot of that. So that was pretty much PT school. I will say that one of the things that I found very interesting on the very first day of PT school, one of our faculty came up to me and pulled me aside and like kind of huddled with me. Like he had his arm around me and he like pulled me in close. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here. He's like, I just want to let you know, PT school is probably going to be incredibly hard for you. I was like, oh, great. Here it comes. He's like, because of your background. And he's like, you might struggle, but just get through it. He's like, because I have no doubt he's like that you will be successful as a therapist. He's like, because you are by far ahead of everybody in this class when it comes to the most important thing, when it comes to physical therapy, which is communication. So I was like, okay. I was like, thanks.
Were you nervous? Did you have a natural concern or caution as you applied to PT school? Like he kind of implanted that a little bit in your head, or maybe you felt that way.
I think at that point, I think I was kind of flying by the seat of my pants because everything had happened so quickly. Like I made a decision in like mid-August of like 2001 that I'm changing my career. I'm going to be a PT. I went and talked to the admission director like 2 days later. That afternoon, I signed up for all my prereqs that would be like the fall and then the spring semester, and then started the following summer in PT school. So I was like kind of flying by the seat of my pants. I think on the very first day of orientation, I was kind of like, oh, what did I get myself into? I am very much older than everybody in this room. Like this will be very interesting. So I think I was a little thrown at first. And I will say, so it probably took a good semester or so before I kind of like really found my footing. And my footing was, oh, I'm going to entertain as much as I can.
Well, talk to us a little bit about after PT school. Like, do you think your acting experience, I mean, it helped you with your presentations, but what about in the clinical education side of things? Did you see a benefit?
Absolutely. So I mean, like I think if I had, so I mean, like when you're a new grad, I don't know if we stress this enough in PT education. Like, for as much as you think you have learned in PT school and you feel like I've got so much knowledge, and then you've had like 30 to 40 weeks of clinical internships where you like feel confident, like, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm a PT. Like, this is great. But then you walk in on day one where you're probably, close to on your own. And then it's like, oh, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. Like I know so little. Like this is like holy cow. But I think for me, I think I kept that in the back of my mind, like, well, at least I know how to talk to people. At least I know how to communicate my needs and what I need, at least from like physicians that I worked with and with the nursing staff. Unfortunately for me, like my first like walking into the burn center was not, it was there was one other PT that worked there, and his dream was to kind of really be a pediatric PT. And so the rehab manager was kind of like, all right, we'll let you do peds, but we also need a PT down in the burn center. So you got to at least stick it out there as well. So when I got there, he was very much like, oh, cool. Like I'm out. Like I'm up and I'm going to do, like, I'll take a couple patients, but like you got everybody else. And then I worked with like 3 occupational therapists. And really, I mean, the occupational, that unit was pretty much always manned by almost entirely OT. Like PT was just like an emergency, like somebody has got to go down and like help OT kind of thing. And so, they really were very kind of territorial, and not very willing with the knowledge. So now I know nothing and I got nobody to help me like know anything, where I have like kind of people who are actively like discouraging me from being there. So I just had to kind of go back to like, all right, well, what do I know how to do? Well, I know I know how to read. I know how to research. I know how to look things up. And so our hospital has a, really great medical library because we were a teaching institution. So I would spend a lot of time, whenever I had free moments, I'd go down to the medical library. I'd pull journals off the shelf, and just start reading as much as I could about, anything, any journal. There are 2 major journals for burn care. And so I would look through those journals and find any articles I could that had anything to do with PT or OT or just rehab in general. And I would just start consuming as much as I could.
So you were your own mentor, really.
Absolutely.
And I have to tell you, the irony is, or if it's ironic or coincidental, the OT that I worked with in Pittsburgh mentored me and then went to work with you.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that was a different dynamic at that point.
By the time she came to work for us, the dynamics in the department had totally shifted at that point, or had shifted before she got there. And we were more in line, like the way things are there now, everybody is really just considered like a burn therapist. And so like there very much could be a day where I walk in and it's like, hey, we're really short on OT. So like your patient list are going to include like, hey, can you pick up a lot of their plan of care for the day? I'm like, yeah, sure. Or there are days like where there are very few PTs. So they very much have to like, hey, can you pick up the PT plan of care on these patients? So the dynamics and how things go there now, as opposed to, almost 20 years ago, are completely different, like 180 degrees.
I worked in an environment also that was incredible, Dave. Like I graduated, it was one of the best environments that I could think of. And then things took a turn for the worse. It became very hostile. People sort of like getting very cutthroat, trying to push people out. And to the point where that's one of the main reasons why I left clinical care, because I just felt like I was being placed in a position where I was being pushed out. And the rest of the people there who were part of this, let's just say, were very selfish and not thinking about the patients and only thinking about themselves and creating this culture that is completely unnecessary. And I think a lot of it also stems from just egos, right? In healthcare, like I'm a physician, or no, not to devalue Andrea because, she's a unicorn, PT and OT, but there's the whole I'm a PT and you're only an OT, where, I mean, that just doesn't need to really exist, right? I guess the question really I have is, what do you think changed in the dynamic in that department?
I think we had a really good, and still have a really good manager who literally just forced the change, right? So he kind of basically forced the problems out, or gently brought the problems to somewhere else, and then brought in people who all had the same mindset, which was, no, we're here for, like, we treat the whole thing. We treat the whole body. Like we're not cutting the patient at the waist, where PT is the waist down and OT is the waist up. I mean, we definitely have areas that, that we, kind of more specialize in. And I think we still kind of fall into that, like PT, gross motor, OT, fine motor kind of thing. But, we're really kind of trained in treating the patient as a whole.
Very similar things, and we can be amazing teams, right? You mentioned that you moved, I think it was from New York to Minnesota, and then you didn't really like the business decision, sort of the theater part of the business decision thing. And then it got me thinking, you've never been a director in a clinical setting, correct?
Have not, no.
Yeah, I didn't think so. So, it seems like that's just not something you enjoy, making those business decisions like that director finally made, like moving people out. But we got to always consider like the team, right? The team that you work with is huge and you got to hire slow and fire fast. And if you got to let people go, like make those decisions just because it's all about the patients. If we're not our best selves, we're not going to be able to provide good patient care. So we can have like 10 podcasts about this, but I'm glad that the dynamic changed for you, is what I'm trying to get to.
Well, it did. And, unfortunately, it was like right as the dynamic was really starting to, I guess, snowball and really kind of shift. That's where I kind of like made my switch to PT education. Then at that point, um,
Likewise, Dave. Likewise.
but I mean, it was the other thing that was also part of it was that by that time I had been presenting at like local, regional, and national conferences and getting really great feedback on my presentation style, which was very, engaging. And again, like, my presentation I would try to make as funny as possible and whatnot. So and I was really enjoying that. And then that kind of led into some adjunct teaching opportunities. And I was like, hey, I'm like, this is great, like captive audience. Like I can make them laugh every day and they're learning and this is fun. So maybe now I'll go into PT education. And so that's kind of where, and I'm like, and things are still like tense here. So let me make that switch. So
Yeah, and I have to say, one thing I love about you, Dave, is you refused to get your terminal degree. Whereas myself, that was a requirement. Eder, you're in that same situation.
Yes, correct. I mean, it was a big push, but still, it is a requirement. Yes.
How did you get to that point of saying no, I'm not?
So it wasn't like that. So I think at first, when I first went in, I did have a requirement at my first university that I worked at. They were like, yeah, you have to get a terminal degree. You've got this many years and to at least get started. And I was like, okay. And I did look into it. And then I think one of the biggest problems for me in looking at a lot of I basically had to look for hybrid programs because the traditional PhD model or whatever, EDD model didn't fit because I couldn't take time off from my primary job. So, but then I was running into these roadblocks like, oh, you got to take the GREs. And I'm like, but I took the GREs. I took the GREs to get into grad school. Yeah, but it's been too many years. I'm like, well, I didn't forget how to read during that. Like why? Like you're like you're putting these like things in front of me like so I was kind of able to like because of that like kind of kick the can down the road. And then I switched universities and they were also very much like, well, this is something that we would like from you. At that point I was kind of like, but why? And it was just like, well, it's a requirement because we have to have because our accrediting body says we have to have so many PhDs. And I'm like, but why? Like, and nobody could really give me like a really good, solid, inspirational message other than that's because our accrediting body says so. Like if somebody really gave me something like inspirational to like, I'm like, wow, that's okay. Like that makes sense. Like, and then the other thing was cost because nobody, at least none of the schools I went to, at least, and none of my jobs were willing to give me monies. And so now I'm at this point where I'm like, hey, I already got like a lot of PT school debt. And now you want me to pile on an additional degree on top of this that you don't want to cover. So that was kind of very much where now I'm like, all right, now I'm putting my foot down. I'm like, unless you could give me an ultimatum at this point, like I'll land on my feet. So
You landed on your feet every time, Dave.
Absolutely. And I love the but why? Because you're right. Everybody says it's because our accrediting body requires it. And by the way, just for people who are listening, I think it used to be 50%. Did that change?
Changing a little bit, but 50%.
So 50% of faculty need to have terminal degrees
But
or program,
why?
but the program will be on probation or receive a citation. So that's everybody's reason why if you go into PT education, you have to get a terminal degree. However, if they said to you, Dave, this will benefit your soul, would you change your mind?
yeah, I mean, if there was something like that, then yeah, like would it benefit me to like learn more statistics? Absolutely, right? Because anytime I come down to doing stuff, I got to find a statistician, right? So like, yeah, all of that stuff would be incredibly helpful, but I know how to do that. And like, guess what? We're also in a department where we have all these PhDs and I'm producing more than all of you. So like that, you can't hang that on me, like, cause I'm being productive, like I'm meeting my requirements. Like I'm productive. So you can't hold that against me. So what else is there? Like I couldn't, and then also, I think I was also running into a lot of problems with a lot of the programs was that I wasn't a good fit for some, like there were a couple of programs I was like, oh, maybe this one. And then they would learn about my background and about my research. And they're like, yeah, we don't have anybody that knows anything about what you're doing. So then I was like not a good fit too. So then I was like, the heck am I doing? This is just ridiculous.
Right. So talking about good fit, we're clinicians, right? We're movement professionals. So you'll see a lot of people that pursue PhDs, specifically PhDs, because EDDs are more focused on that educational side for the most part. They have a PhD in like kinesiology, exercise science, or like some molecular something or other. We come back to your question, but why? How does that help them in our field to become better educators, right? So what I did, Dave, was I was sort of finding the same thing. I was being pressured into it, but it was also a goal of mine to complete a PhD. In hindsight, I didn't even know why I wanted it. It was just like the letters. At this point now that I'm just in this in my dissertation phase, I'm like I could do without it. But what I did was I had to find something that would benefit my soul because I didn't want to go spend all my money because nobody's paying for this. We're paying it out of pocket, and all these years studying a PhD again on exercise science or something that wasn't really going to benefit me. So my PhD is in teaching and education learning sciences. It is absolutely not the most like fun PhD, like the most extravagant, but it's at least helping me become a better educator. So that's where I found my fit. But I still had to sell myself because when I applied and I was talking to my program director and advisor, like, wait, a PT? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? I was like, well, I'm in education. Hello. And so that's my but why. But I figured it out on my own. It wasn't because somebody told me. There really isn't a reason nor a correlation between do you have a PhD or an EDD or a DHSE? And because you do, you're a better educator.
I would much rather it where like in like a perfect world, like do like shit like why do we need PhDs in the PT programs? Well, like if one of our goals as PT educators is to ensure that our students walk out the door on day one, to be honest, like do I feel like our students need to be able to know how to conduct research? We could argue about that. I really think our students should come out the door being good consumers of the literature that's out there. Because I think that's one of, we can get into a big conversation about problems that we have in this country right now with people who do their research. But it would really, really, really benefit our students to be able to, and so like to be able to really teach students how to critically appraise the evidence that's out there, I think is outstanding. And we need people in our departments that can do that. For the rest of us, I think it's more imperative that our institutions are ensuring that we are keeping up to date on what we do. So that way, as we are teaching, we are ensuring that we know what we're talking about, especially when we're trying to get students to critically think about patient and patient care.
You mentioned before that you would spend time in the medical library. You taught yourself how to be an amazing clinician in wound care and burns. But I guess my thought is, how do you think that benefited you now as a teacher? Because what you just described, at least what I heard, was that you think that instructors, faculty, they need to be able to identify the challenges that students have and help guide them in the direction of being able to critically appraise the literature and use that in their clinical practice. But really, Dave, you from the beginning of this conversation talked about how you taught yourself how to do that. So do you feel like you had that process down when you left PT school?
Yes. So I think I could say beyond a shadow of a doubt that at least the one thing my program really prepped me for, that I could at least, under the direction of my own research advisor and because I went to the University of Minnesota, we're R1 institution. So they're producing a lot of research. So I at least knew how to critically praise the evidence that was out there. like notoriously, I have a colleague that I work with who would walk in the door with a case study on some kind of splint that was put on one patient and one patient only, and they now want to change clinical practice because I did this research. That's just a case study. Like, no, we're not changing our clinical practice because of one thing. Like, we can do a study where we now look at this with some patients. And then so there's a lot of that nonsense. I feel like my school definitely prepared me that, hey, like everything that you learn in PT school, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Like there is so much more to this. I think for me, and I think also why it made me a better clinician was because I think I got like maybe like a 3-hour lecture in all of PT school. So, on burn injury, by a very well-renowned burn therapist, right? But it was one lecture. And I mean, like, if I probably don't have my notes anymore, but I remember looking back on them and like, wow, there is nothing in there. And then like as I'm sitting there and I'm reading textbooks and journal articles, and I'm like, holy cow, like there is so much, where I'm diving into like the cellular, like what's going on at the cellular level with these patients. And I'm like, at least having like, does that make you better at hands-on? No, absolutely not. But because I know what's actually going on with these patients, and I can now answer like, well, this is why this is happening. And now from a physical therapy perspective, like these are the things that we can do now to help combat that. So that way our patients don't develop problems, down the road. And it was a lot of, and unfortunately, look, I mean, if I look at my very early career, certainly during that first year, I had some patients who I did not benefit. They walked out the door with horrible contractures, walked out of that unit disabled because I had no idea what I was doing.
Do you think a mentor would have helped?
Oh my gosh, yes. Absolutely.
In what you just experienced, that's not abnormal. I mean, I can look back in my first years of clinical practice when I thought I was some sort of a stud. I'm like, dude, what were you doing? And it's to Andrea's question, like a mentor would help.
And I think, I mean, at that point, like my well, see, and so here's the issue, right? So like my communication obviously did not work well with the therapist that I was working with, but I didn't even really know the right questions to ask, right? And so then as I start to learn and I'm like, oh, well, this is a pain management problem right now. And now because I know that and I know what's going on in this situation, now I can confidently now walk to a physician and be like, this is what I need. And now I've got the background in communication and I could talk to people. So now I could talk and get what I want. Right. And so, but it took that learning. And I mean, man, but again, I had a mentor. I would not probably have suffered as much during that first year for sure.
Do you think that Dave 2024 could tell Dave circa 2006 what questions to ask, could guide him in which questions to ask?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and at least my first instinct was like, I would tell Dave 2005, 2006, like, no, you got to go do this right now. But truly, I mean, that's not what mentorship is. But at least ask younger Dave the proper questions to get younger Dave to start thinking like, oh, okay, like I hadn't considered that. Like, all right, let me think on this.
I love that. And clearly it's like baptism by fire, right? And sometimes we learn best that way, but you're right, there are consequences to that. And the beauty is now you're an amazing professor who is doing a great job planting those seeds with their students. And I think it's great what you're doing. I wanted to just touch on one other topic before we're done today, because I'm really excited for you to share a little bit about your views and how you're really bringing the acting and improv to the classroom and how you see that as supporting students in their development.
So early in my teaching, one of the things that I noticed, I noticed it before, and I don't know if what what my professor in PT school, what he had told me, I don't know, like it's always been in the back of my brain. It wasn't like forefront, like, here's another prime example of, about you and your communication. But one of the things that you definitely see early when you're working clinically is you can see the clinicians, the nurses, the other therapists, the physicians, no matter who it is, you could see who's effective and you could see who's not. And the ones who are always effective are the ones who can communicate very well, right? Like I always say, like the best compliment that I can get as a therapist is when the resident walks out of the door and then I explain to the patient what the resident was talking about. And then the patient thanks me and says, thank you, because nobody has explained what the heck is going on. And you explained it like so easily. Like, oh, okay, great. Thanks. Like, that's a great compliment. I'm like, okay, cool. And that's a problem in medicine. I think all of us have experienced going to a doctor or whatever, and just like, like where they have no ability to communicate well. And physicians are not taught that. And so I saw Alan Alda on TV. He was being interviewed and he was talking about how he was working with scientists to get scientists to improve their ability to communicate using improv, because he said that, you've got all these great scientists out there, but if they can't communicate their thoughts or their ideas, well, then their thoughts and ideas don't get out there. And I was like, oh my gosh, so like huge bells like went off in my brain. So then I started looking up improv in medicine, and sure enough, there is a huge, and actually there's a huge movement. It's a group called the Applied Improvisational Network, where you've got people who use improvisation not for its theatrical purposes, to make people laugh or whatever, but to use it in all settings to help people communicate better. And I was like, well, that's perfect for PT, because essentially what we do as physical therapists is every patient encounter is essentially improv. And what was, I think, early on in my PT career, PT education career, we're watching students with their clipboard full of questions and interviewing the patient and going question, 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 and never hearing and never having the conversation because they can't get themselves off the clipboard. And finally, I was just like, guys, like the evaluation is just, it's this kind of, yes, there's certain things that we have to hit and get to during the evaluation, but really it's got to be improvisational, because you never know what the patient's going to say. And you have to be able to take whatever they're saying, process it, and then let that guide you and let that guide the session. Your page can't guide the session. It just can't. And so then I went and then I got trained in medical improv at Northwestern University. Katie Watson, who's a long history in improvisation, she's taught at Second City, and she teaches in their medical school teaches ethics, and she started doing improv with the medical students to make them as a kind of I guess all of in at that university, all of their students are required to take a humanities course. And so one of the choices that they can take is medical improv. And so it's an elective, but it's always full. And she helps these medical students become better communicators by doing these learning how to improvise. And just by using simple improvisational games and getting people to be able to think better on their feet, or at least not be so paralyzed on their feet, and it comes down to just the very simple, improv's got very simple rules. Like and look, as an actor, as a young actor, you couldn't pay me money to go take improv, because my thought was like, I can't get on a stage with nothing. No way. Like, I need a script and I need blocking and I need rehearsals and I need time. And I can't just think of anything on the spot. And kind of in my own journey, like before I could take this medical improv class, I was like, before I take this medical improv class, I actually should probably go take some improv. And so I signed up to take improv classes. And on the very first day, the first thing my teacher said was, we're going to go over the rules of improv. And I was like, wait, what rules? I was like, there are rules? And then I was like, like I felt like, like the old Looney Tunes cartoons, like where like the guy's head like turns into a sucker or jackass, and that's how I felt sitting there. I was like, if I had known there were rules, I would have done this a long time ago. Ah. And it's because of the rules that make improv work. And the first rule is yes and. It's the first rule is agreement. So whatever I throw out there, whatever thought or idea I throw out there, my partner will agree to that and then add to it. All right. As opposed to say no, and then it's like that blocks the idea. And then they give something back to me and I agree with it and I add to it. That rule alone makes improv just open up, that one rule alone. And so and then I found that, I started working with students and I started kind of like teaching it on the side and then finding that every student that took the improv class loved it and felt like they got something out of it.
Dave, I'm curious because now I need an example. You do wound care. So following your rules of improv, what if I were your patient and I had a really bad wound and I literally just asked you straight up, like, do you think I'm going to lose my limb? Is that a yes and? Like, I'm trying to follow because I love this. Like, how do you respond to that? Or am I understanding it incorrectly?
I think you're understanding it incorrectly. So no, so I don't, yes, but I don't, I would never deny a patient their moment or their story either, or like, no, 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 no. And I think really where like yes and comes into play in terms of just general communication, because it's so easy in life to just say the word no. It's so easy to say the word no. And I have like I call them the person who is the know it all, the NO it all, not the KNOW it all. No, we can't do that. I've got this really great at no, we can't do that. No. And I certainly in medicine, you see it all the time. In a hospital, like, no, we can't do that. They can tell you a million reasons why you can't and can never give you one reason why we could. But if you keep in the back of your brain, yes, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to, you're not a doormat. You don't just let, you don't let people walk all over you, but you at least keep your brain open to the thought of like, I am not going to shut down every idea that comes to me. And so in every patient encounter, I'm not going to necessarily shut down everything that they're going to give me because I might need some of that information because maybe something they're telling me is actually way more important than I had considered.
Yeah, I mean, listening to their story is very, very important. And when you were mentioning the students going through a checklist and questions, I'm just thinking of students going through a checklist and questions, and then when they get to my class, I'm like, I'm not going to give you a skit. Just go. And we don't have a paper. No, just ask questions. You can't get it wrong. But what if I ask this question before that one? Go back. What if I forget to ask it? Ask it the next session.
Or ask later. I'm like,
or ask later. Yes.
Each session is not is not a soap note. It's not like, oh, like you're into your objective measure. You're doing tests and measures, and you're like, I guess we'll never know. No, it's like, so then you just have this conversation like, oh, tell me about your home. Like now that we're already up and walking, tell me about like we're like, when you're discharged, where you're going to. Like there's so many things that like, and I think students and novice clinicians especially, I think they panic at that point. They're like, oh, I forgot to ask. And then they don't. Like as opposed to like, no, 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 just keep it going.
Do you think that's because, though, we have so many rules for them to follow? Going back to the rule thing, like I know in my PT program, it was very structured. Like, don't forget this, don't forget that. And then you almost create these unspoken rules. But then there's your improv, which kind of opens up the door of creativity.
It does. And I think also the problem with all of the rules is that then the students don't question, well, why am I actually asking this question? Like, can I tell you, like the bane of my existence? Like, and it to this day, like it still like enrages me when I hear a student ask in an evaluation, in every evaluation, like when they're asking about home, like, do you have small dogs or area rugs? And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, I want to know if they have tripping hazards at home. Like, why? What is it about this patient that you need to know whether or not they might trip in the home? You haven't even done anything yet. They haven't even moved yet. You don't know anything about this person. But now you need to know about small dogs and area rugs. Like, is there some epidemic that I'm unaware of? Like, that I'm missing, that I missed something in the Washington Post, some expose on the rash of falls in the home caused by small dogs? Like, I don't know of that happening. Like, could that be a question I might want to ask down the road? Maybe. I'm not saying that it's not the worst question to ask somebody. You could certainly ask it. You don't even know why you're asking these things right now, but you got it on a paper because at some point in time you had a lecture that said, ask your patient about small dogs and area rugs because we don't want them to fall, without thinking the process through. Like, why am I asking what I'm asking?
And you just mentioned something that I absolutely love. That's when students do this and they don't do it enough. Now, there is a good and proper way of doing this and a very poor way of doing it. But I love when students question what I'm teaching them. We're like, why are we doing this? Like, why are you teaching me this? Right? They're not questioning it as in this is a waste of my time or questioning the reliability of it. That why are you teaching me this? Or why are we asking about dogs and rugs? I'll be able to give them an explanation. So I think we need to change that narrative somehow a little bit. To Andrew, your point of they're taught all these rules. We'll teach you these rules, but feel free to ask us why we're teaching you them. Get a better understanding of why we're teaching you those rules. In my acute care course, during our first cohort, one of my projects was an evidence-based mobility protocol. I don't work in ortho, Dave, and one of the students did their mobility protocol on laminectomies, and I had taught laminectomies, and she comes up to me just like all bashful, like, Dr. G, I just want to let you know that during my research, I found all these new rules, and you kind of weren't teaching us the right stuff. I don't know what she expected from me, like if she expected me to blow up and be like, "How dare you?" I was like, "Give me that, thank you so much," like, great, thanks for helping me out because I don't work in that area, and so like, I think that students should ask more questions about why we're teaching them what would teach them.
I think to kind of jump on that is that I think, and here's the problem, like in PT education, we're not taught how to be PT educators either. So that has taken me a dozen plus years, and it took me years before I became comfortable being able to say, I don't know, when a student had a question for me.
But if I'm being honest, from my experience, PT educators are not always the greatest mentors either, and for each other.
Oh my God. Well, yes, I got no mentorship in PT education either. So I got no mentorship as a physical therapist. I got no mentorship as as an educator either. I think that was even more of a trial by, sorry to use the word fire, than it was like even as a new physical therapy clinician, because students could be very brutal, especially on course evaluation.
Yeah, right. When it's like they don't have a name on there, they can be so brutal. But you know what, Dave? Andrew gave me an amazing piece of advice a couple years ago with course evals, and I'll be completely transparent. I have not been heartbroken yet, but I'm going to be heartbroken one day with a course eval. But she told me don't read the stuff, just look at the numbers, because students can write really harsh things when they have the opportunity to do it without their name on them. But the numbers, they're more beneficial. But to your point, I think that as educators, maybe we need to, dare I say, humanize ourselves a little bit more and not seem like we're just the know-it-alls, the professionals, put us up on pedestals, that we can be wrong and we are human and we make mistakes. And because of that, then students can relate to us more and they'll feel more comfortable asking us questions and even helping us grow. I had, some of my students came up to me not too long ago and they were asking me to help them review like 3-point gate and 2-point gate. And I'm like, I can help you, but I'm probably going to tell you the wrong thing. So go talk to them instead. Most of us don't do that. And it's because we are sort of taught not to do that. Like we can't be wrong. And it's actually better to be wrong and just say, I don't know that, and give them the resource, right? Like find them the resource, go in that direction.
Yeah, I certainly, like, early in my career, I would have been in a panic, like getting that question. Well, that one I could figure out, but like if I got, an area like I'm, certainly neuro is not my cup of tea. So, but now I'm like, why are you asking me? Go talk to Doctor So and so. Like, if you want a better, like, I can tell you what I'm going to do. Like, if that this patient, and certainly, I mean, yes, patients with neurological conditions can get burns too. And I know what I would do in this. You probably will get a more thorough answer though if you talk to the person who does this for a living.
Dave, I really miss hanging out with you. And I am so grateful that we were able to connect tonight. And I learned a lot more about you than I realized. You bring a lot to the PT profession and to your patients, clearly. Thank you for all of that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so much, Andrea. And another secret of Dave's, it's our secret actually. As resilient as he has been and grown into who he is today, and Dave, you really need to look at all that you've done because it's incredible. I mean, taking all these courses on your own. Should PT education fail, we have a blood pact, even though it's not a real blood pact, it's a blood pact. We're going to become storm chasers.
Oh my
Him
gosh.
and I.
Mhm.
That's our next gig. We're going to become storm chasers. Like, I think that's what we said on Instagram at least 2 times a week, storms. So he's going to be an excellent storm chaser with me one day.
Yeah, there it was not too long ago. It was like a Friday. It was like late in the day. I was at the hospital and everybody was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I was like, "All right, I'm heading out." And they're like, "Oh, what are you doing tonight? Are you doing anything fun?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm like the Midwest is supposed to get annihilated with, possible tornadoes." I said, "I'm going to go watch this guy that I follow on YouTube who live stream all these storm chasers. So I'm going to go home and watch." And I did. And I sat in front of my computer with a beer with this YouTube station and watching these storm chasers for like 4 hours. I'm like, I should get a life.
Well, thanks again, Dave. It was great connecting, and I hope you come back for sure in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to.
Awesome.
Thanks, Dave. We appreciate you.
Guys.
Thank you for joining us on the Iconic Scholar podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to continue the conversation, don't forget to connect with us on social media as @ScholarNetics360. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And remember, always consult with a healthcare professional for medical advice. Until next time,